thought I cannot do The Witcher without bringing that sound in. If you've watched The Witcher, then that folk music may already ring in your head. But I wanted to bring you all into the realm of fantasy for the next 15 minutes. So I'm looking at the integration and subversion in folklore in Netflix's The Witcher, in what's possibly the most quickly put together presentation I've ever done in my life. So you're on a journey today with me this morning. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm not going to get into too much of the plot of The Witcher. It's very, very complex as we go on. If you've already seen the TV series, then you will understand a lot more. If you haven't, then I do highly recommend it as a TV series to watch, definitely. So that's your Sunday night sorted. But in a nutshell, we've got Geralt of Rivia. He's a witcher, and witchers hunt monsters. So he's like this monster hunter, but he's not quite the typical human that you'd see. He's a witcher, which in its sense is its own form of monster. However, as much as Geralt of Rivia wants to just hunt monsters and live his isolated life, he's drawn into the times of conflict at the time. We've got the Nilfgaard Empire and other kingdoms, all at battle with one another, and his own destiny and fate comes in there due to a certain princess of Sintra who is linked to his own destiny, which is Ciri. So that's in a nutshell. I have to do the briefest of synopsis there. Next slide, please. So it was written by a Polish author. I am not going to pronounce the name. Hopefully you can all see the name there. He was a Polish author, and he wrote The Witcher kind of on a whim for his own fantasy magazine in the late 1980s. And he brought out the book series that was first published in 1993. Now, just wanted to mention that The Witcher was brought as a book series first, but also that the Polish author, the times that he was writing in the 1980s in Poland were quite a time of conflict itself. There was a lot of change going on, political and ideological. There was all kinds of uncertainty at that time. In particular, like they had a communist government. I think it was 1989 that they brought the end of the Polish People's Republic, and that developed and changed into the more contemporary Poland that we know today. So there were a lot of uncertain times when he was writing that series. Next slide, please. So I mentioned integrating folklore and what I mean by that. When you watch The Witcher, it's very fascinating that we've got these tales that have many different folklores from many different places. We've got different stories and folklores and fairy tales, whether it's Germanic, Slavic, Celtic, Polish, all different kinds of tales run throughout The Witcher. But more interesting for me is that instead of just having them differently, they also are integrated. That means that there'll be a Germanic and a Slavic folklore that is then merged into being one amalgamated monster, and they are represented throughout the TV series, well, the Witcher series itself. And it was interesting for me because these monsters that Geralt faces throughout the Witcher are quite a good amalgamation of folklore, and I wanted to look into what that could mean in terms of culture, in terms of cultural reflection, why these blended monsters mean something, and what are they saying, really. Next slide, please. So merging monsters, welcoming other. Now, from one angle, I won't say all the different angles today, because like I said, I could probably do this for about an hour and a half. The monstrous other. Monsters are usually a depiction, an embodiment of something that is placed outside of society. It's usually some kind of symbolic representation of other or of marginalised, something that society doesn't like, or it's different. They represent difference. And Historically, that's happened as reflections throughout, whether it's in literature or film. The monsters here, being that they are an amalgamation of different folklores, made it interesting in terms of what may be happening in terms of accepting cultural marginalisation in more contemporary times. Historically, we can go through history in terms of when cultures have changed, but right now, in this period of time, these monsters being a blend of differences of marginalised other is really interesting in how that is reflecting in anxieties that I will speak about soon. Next slide, please. So I'll do a few examples of monsters, a few of my favourites. So in season 1, episode 1, I'm doing this off the top of my head, people. Season 1, episode 1, we see the Kikimora folkloric monster. In The Witcher, it's new. It's a spider-like, shall we say? It's that picture on the left. It's like a spider-like swamp monster that we see Geralt of Rivia having to kill and defeat. And it is a different aesthetic, shall we say, for the traditional folkloric Kiki monster, which is on the right. Slavic folklore depicts that the Kikimora, well, it's not a monster, the Kikimora is a female house spirit, quite mischievous, often brought in times of turmoil. So they believe that, unfortunately, when there was a death of a child, then a Kikimora house spirit would appear. Had a lot in line with, I suppose, what the Western world would now know as like the poltergeist, would move bits of furniture around, would create havoc in your kitchen, and it always appeared as a mischievous spirit. So interestingly, from the get-go in The Witcher, we have traditional folklore that has been readapted into contemporary aesthetics. So even that definitely made me sit forward and go, okay, why are they, what's happening here with that? Next slide, please. I'm going to mention, as I said, there's folklore and fairy tale throughout The Witcher, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on this if you haven't seen it, because I don't want to do too many spoilers today, but I'm going to mention the Beauty and the Beast episode. So this is season 2, episode 1, and we have Geralt's old friend, Nivellen, as we see in the picture here. He doesn't normally look like that, so it's quite a shock when he's visited by Geralt. Nivellen is the cursed beast. He was a man cursed, and he has fallen in love with the beautiful Verena. Now that seems a typical fairy tale. It seems Beauty and the Beast throughout. However, what The Witcher manages to do here is really twist this on its head, because Nivellen is not necessarily the beast. Unfortunately, and I will not go into too much detail, Verena, while she is beautiful, is quite a murderous little monster herself, and is up against Geralt in terms of the monstrosity. So it's quite a sad story. But the ultimate message that's being played here for this amalgamation of fairy tale and folklore is just the classic, don't judge a book by its cover. You know, Nivellen looks a beast, but he's not. Verena looks a beauty, but she's not as innocent as she looks. And this nods towards Geralt of Rivia as himself in this episode. He is a witcher, and witches are deemed as monstrous themselves. They are feared, they are seen as an outsider, they are seen as marginalised from society, but he is not necessarily all as bad as he would seem either. So there's a lot of blurring of these boundaries in terms of cultural reflections. By bringing the monsters into different forms, by adapting them, by changing them, by subverting them, we're looking at the marginalised coming into culture as well. And you can even think of it in terms of right now. Everybody could probably think of an example right now, for instance, gender, disability, race, sexuality, whatever it is being amalgamated into our own cultures. The Witcher reflects, and this episode is brilliant for that, and the monster person boundaries. Next slide, please. And finally, I'm just going to give an example of the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt is historically quite a blend of different folklores. all across the board, from whether it's got Norse, Celt, Germanic, it's every single, lots of different countries and different folklores have a version of the Wild Hunt. And that's, I put there, Norse tales have Odin leading hunts, but all different kinds and forms, whether it's Valkyries, elves, even dogs have been known to have been perceived as the Wild Hunt. And the thing that the Wild Hunt does is it brings an omen of doom. Doom and gloom is coming your way, whether you like it or not. And in The Witcher, they're about, I think in season 3, they are definitely about to play a bigger role, but they have been there, especially in season 2, ready, and they keep bringing this impending sense of something bad is coming. And that is the folklore tale of something as well. Now, when a culture, historically, let alone now, is going through a change, and the Wild Hunt is there to almost bring this anxiety out in us, this sense of impending doom. Will it be okay? Will it not be okay? Are we going to be okay? Are we not going to be okay? There's that sense of anxiety in society. And the Wild Hunt really does a great representation of this and embodies that, especially that they come for your children in many tales. They are coming for your children. They will take your children to the other realms and keep them as slaves. So they're not very nice in that sense. But interestingly, they are also interpreted in different places, in different folklores, as to what they are bringing. Not just war. So you've got war, that they will say that it's coming. They will say that political turmoil is coming. And they will say that maybe plague or disease is coming. And I think at the moment we can all think of plague or disease, tick, political turmoil, tick, possible conflicting countries, tick. So the Wild Hunt is an embodiment of all that can be going on as well. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly mention the Slavic folklore as to Baba Yaga that I'll be talking about. I think it's pronounced Baba Yaga, actually, but I'm probably going to say Baba Yaga because it's easier. But one of my favourite folkloric figures is Baba. So depicted traditionally, especially in Slavic folklore, as an old crone. She lives in a hut with chicken legs, because who wouldn't want to? I'd want to live in a hut with chicken legs. Rides a pestle and mortar around the forest. But interestingly, even though Baba Yaga seems to be a very, she's often, people perceive her as an evil force, not so much evil as people would think. She's ambiguous, which means she will help or not help. She will hurt or not hurt you. It depends entirely on what you go to her for, what you want her help with, what you desire, what you wish. There is a lot of ambiguity about Baba Yaga as almost this grandmother crone that has the ability to either give you everything you want or to take it away. Next slide, please. So in season 2 of The Witcher, we meet Voleth Mare. And she's also known throughout the series as the Deathless Mother. She feeds on pain. She wants pain in order to grow stronger. She is the old crone version of Baba Yaga. And even though there's an amalgamation here, she is trapped inside a hut on chicken legs. And she uses people's desire in order to gain that pain. Now, in the series, in season 2, we have, again, I won't go too much into the plot, but we have Yennefer, Francesca and Fringilla, who are almost tricked into meeting Voleth, and they each desire something. Yennefer desires her chaos and magic back. Francesca desires her baby that's about to be born healthy, and Fringilla, she desires more power. She's a Nilfgaard. She's in the Nilfgaard Empire, but she needs that extra power, almost a feminine power, in order to stand up in her ranks. So, trapped in this hut with chicken legs, Voleth has other motives because she's ultimately part of the Wild Hunt. So she uses these 3 females in order to get what she wants. Next slide, please. And this getting what she wants is, and again, it's almost like a fairy tale moral here. And I put it, be careful what you wish for. The tale of Baba Yaga in Hiss and in Voleth is that by Yennefer and Francesca and Fringilla, they desire all this power and what they want the most, it can come back and be the worst thing that they could imagine. I will not go into spoilers. Ultimately, Yennefer does refuse the power that is given, offered by Voleth. But I will not go into detail about what happens, so that you can watch the series. But it is a sad, and a steep price is paid to ultimately release Voleth by feeding her the pain that she wanted. And this popular warning, this fairy tale of be careful what you wish for, because it may not be, even though you desire it, even though you want it the most, it may not necessarily be okay once you receive it. This runs through cultures all the time. And in terms of cultural reflection, I feel that it ties in here because we want change as a culture. We not just now, in history, we want changes. We strive for change. We strive for betterness. We want our societies to improve. We want our ideologies to get better. But with that comes a fear. It comes a very wariness in humans about, well, we want this, but is it going to be okay? And in the ultimate nightmare horror folklore, it usually will say it might be or it might not. You will have to see. And that's what Baba Yaga really does represent. It's an ambiguity about whether change in culture will ultimately lead to good or to bad. We do not know. And I put the Little Mermaid there because it just reminded me, be careful what you wish for. Giving up part of yourself for what you desire comes at a price for that. Next slide, please. So just to finish on cultural subversion part of it. So I've gone through the integration of folklore and how this comes through as the monsters within the series. The subverting of folklore in terms of The Witcher is almost like a cultural overthrowing, because subversion itself means to overthrow, really, whether it's a political system or an ideological change. And The Witcher is rife with conflicts of kingdoms, cultures. We've got mages, we've got elves, we've got the Nilfgaard Empire, we've got monsters, we've got fate, we've got destiny. There's such an absolute blend in there. And it represents so much change in culture as you watch it throughout. And it gives this reflection of that throughout our lives, whether it's now in 2022, whether it's in the 1980s when it was written, even beyond that, you know, we can go back, Middle Age, all the time. There is some kind of change in society. It can be any kind of change. And we always strive for those better societies. And what The Witcher does is show us how that anxiety can come through in terms of art, in terms of film, TV, literature. It is a brilliant depiction of that by using folklore. Next, I can't say it. Next slide, please. And finally, just a picture of Geralt there. No, to sum up then, just a picture of Geralt. Can't not add Geralt. So finally, The Witcher reflects our own cultural changes and anxieties surrounding that. It uses a blend of folklore to show how the marginalised other is becoming part of our culture, and that can become through as something that can be quite frightening. The wild hunt frightening. It could be something that we're scared that be careful what you wish for. Are we going to pay a high price for this in terms of Baba Yaga? But one thing that I would leave with is Geralt, seen here. Geralt of Rivia, and even Princess of Sintra, but Geralt himself mainly. He is the hope. He shows that you can be the marginalised other. He is both. He is a monster, but he's not. He's a man. He is an outsider, but he's not. He's part of the cultural race as well. He gives hope in this series as well, that all those fears, all those anxieties can be made possible. And he is that embodiment of that. And I will leave it at that. Thank you.